I for many years thought, oh, it would be really wonderful to have someone from the New School attend. And Cameron and Francisco showed up a couple of years, more than a couple of years ago, and attended the Summer Institute. And he's a doctoral student at the New School. And every year, every year would say, well, you know, I'll have something to present soon.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is the year that Cameron has agreed to actually share some of his research with us. So it's great to have you here actually presenting as well as speaking.
Yeah, right, thank you. So this is my fourth year here. I've been studying economics and history at the New School. And this paper I'm going to present is a paper I wrote for Duncan Foley, advanced political economy class at the New School. So it's been Duncan Foley approved. Relatively approved. Relatively. So if you know anything about Hegelian philosophy, so this is not Hayek. This paper is not about Hayek. The spirit of reflexivity with social sciences. So my motivation for the research is I was intrigued by Marx's concept of wealth creation under capitalism, or the market would set us free. And I was intrigued by the shared radical vision of real Marxists, meaning non-reformist Marxists, Keynesian Marxists, but real Marxists. And then also the libertarian Austrian school, meaning denationalization of money, things like that. And I enjoyed very much Murray Rothbard's writings on the history of economic thought. So a lot of these ideas, and then I wanted to do an eminent critique of Marxist thought, as opposed to just criticizing it externally, taking it seriously, getting inside the thought, and doing a critique of it. And you'll see I changed the title of the paper. It was a critique of Karl Marx and the origins of the social theory of the class struggle. But I thought that would be too Hegelian and too Marxian for this crowd. But in fact, it is a critique. So the overview is, I'll go into, it's a historiography is what it is. Looking at Karl Marx's relations to these, what's called the pre-Austrians. Murray Rothbard calls them the pre-Austrians. In fact, what they are is French Enlightenment thinkers, or some of the early subjective utility theorists. And so there's some shared pre-analytical visions, but it's only Marx's philosophical and religious analytical predispositions which makes him turn these original class theorists. So I'll get into why the surplus, the classical economics definition of surplus, why it is necessarily social under Marx's pre-analytical dispositions. And then we'll get into some commonalities and divergences in their thoughts. Okay. So this is my contribution to the history of economic thought. The main, in these writers, and excuse me for my horrible French, these are French writers at the time of Napoleon, during the time of the Napoleonic Wars. You could call them French radicals, or French Enlightenment thinkers, or again, these original utility theorists, subjectivists. And Marx, the main one is Augustin Thierry. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct. 1818. And all of these, there was this journal, the Censor European, between 1817 and 1819, which contains all of Marx's ideas Marx is credited with his historical materialism and stages of history and theories of human progress towards freedom, but all of these things were done earlier by these French radical thinkers, or these pre-Austrians. So it's not really not Hayek, is it? So there's the stages of history, social theory, class struggle, exploitation, historical movement to freedom, and the perfectibility of man's nature are all, or the right and raising of consciousness are all contained in these Central European writings 50 years before, 45 years before Marx. So this stuff to Tracy, in Marx's published writings, in Capital, 1867, he does references to Tracy, and then the theories of surplus value. And most of my work is from the theories of surplus value, especially book 3, which is Marx's critique of vulgar economics, or bourgeois economics. And it's basically everyone who doesn't agree with Marx's definition of value is a bourgeois or vulgar. Which probably meant different things, of course, than we do today. But it was vulgar. And so Thierry is not mentioned in any of Marx's published works, but there's a record I found, letters to various people, Marx, Engels, Marx, and Ledliner, over a 30-year period that Marx was reading and discussing Augustin Thierry, whose writings in 1818 in the Censored European was the most profound writings on the original social theory of the class struggle. And Jean-Baptiste, of course, Karl Marx disliked intensely. And Cantillon, who was also belongs up there with Turgot, even before Turgot, I believe, it was also an original pre-Austrian, or again, utility theorist, subjective utility theorist, but Marx does not reference.
Could you tell me what the arrows mean?
This just means that Marx references de Tracy, in 1860 in Capital, theories of surplus value, Thierry just in these letters.
Reference.
Yeah, reference, and Charles Comte in Capital, 1867.
And the solid arrows?
The solid arrows mean that these are the relationships between these writers to each other. So Thierry reviewed de Tracy in the Censored European, Comte and de Noyer, and Thierry were the main contributors to this journal, the founders of this journal. And Jean-Baptiste and de Tracy, I'll be like Turgot and say, I don't remember. And then, well, I mean, Jean-Baptiste was highly respected French economist, political economist. Okay, so then, okay. So you have Schumpeter's pre-analytical visions. So you can debate whether economics is actually a science or not. But so the starting point under capitalism is for both the pre-Austrians, which is an anachronistic word. So the French radicals. The starting point under capitalism is private property and competitive markets. And then Marx, economic value is created by the exploitation of labor. It implies that value is objective and aggregated. It's based on the classical notions of long period analysis and natural value. Labor is the single determinant of value. The class struggle is between capital and labor. And the laws of motion through historical progress is a dialectical fight over the surplus. And then for the pre-Austrians, there's original utility theorists, and which is not unrelated to French utilitarianism, not English utilitarianism. Value is created through subjective value in exchange, gains through exchange, which is the opposite of Marx. Marx is as we'll see, value is just, it's not expanded through exchange. It's just maintained through exchange. And then there is no concept of natural value. It's not a cost of production or labor definition of value. And this is the big one, is the class struggle is between the state and free men. And the state and free man is the productive labor, and the state is the unproductive labor. And the laws of motion are based on a market process, which is again a anachronistic word, concept, but it's in Turgot's writings, as we'll see. And so this is, Marx was originally a Hegelian philosopher, and then he was a materialist. So he and he had physics envy, like so many economists. Many, but certainly not all. In considering such transformations, it is always necessary to distinguish between the transformation of the economic conditions of production, which can be determined with the precision of natural science, and that's the classical laws of physics, where the value created through exploited labor is maintained through exchange, and the legal, political, religious, artistic, or philosophical, in short, ideological forms, in which men become conscious of this conflict and fight it out. So he's a materialist. He tries to make economics like a closed physics system. And to juxtapose that with the pre-Austrians, there is no space for mutual gains through human exchange if value can only be conserved phenomenologically and not expanded subjectively, as in the pre-Austrian analytical vision. So, and probably most people here know about Marx's scientific socialism, Marx and Engels' scientific socialism, so I'll just run through this quickly. You have different stages of history which are unsustainable. They're dialectics, unsustainable dialectics, which then form into a synthesis and a new stage of history. They're unsustainable, and these syntheses move to create their own dialectic in the next social relations of production, modes of production, and then you move to the next stage of history. And so you have a historical progression towards human freedom under Engels, Marx's scientific socialism. And then capitalism is the last stage of prehistory, where the worker revolution leads to the dictatorship of the proletariat. The first time in history that the majority would rule over the minority. So you have a dictatorship. However, consciousness then gets raised, and the state withers away, and you move from socialism to communism. And this is the Communist Manifesto. Probably most people have seen this. In the place of old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. This is once the state withers away, after the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is after the revolution. Again, society is no longer politically based. Okay, so we just like, so Hegel was reacted against the Scottish Enlightenment of natural law and individual rights, and had a radical creationism theory. Man was a communal person, a social person, a species being whose true essence could only be found in uniting what Hegel called the other. There was only a change in human nature, a change in consciousness, which could negate, subsume, and transcend the other, and thus achieve a higher state of human existence. For Marx, this was the reunification. The reunification of man with his species being is the beginning of history, and that's communism. So, Hegel's idea of alienation is a radical creationism, where the creation of nature, including man, was an act of alienating man from God. So God created man not out of love, but out of loneliness. And this created Hegel's social theory of mind, where only a collective social man can reunite with God. And of course, this is complete opposite of Enlightenment thinking, where it's your behavior on earth, which then is an individual redemption. So it was a social collective redemption as opposed to an individual redemption. And Marx believed that man was separated from himself, his species being, by limits of consciousness. Hegel said that man placed these limits upon himself through his mental or ideological processes. Marx said the opposite, turning Hegel on his head, and believed that it was man's material economic surroundings which prevented the rising collective consciousness and allowing man's reunification with him or herself. This alienation under capitalism manifests itself in the economic division of labor. This communal or social philosophical predisposition then was the basis of Marx's science and scientific socialism. If you view society or the economy as Marx and the other classical economists did, as first a system which reproduces itself, then anything beyond this material reproduction represents a surplus, right? Isn't that classical economics? Somewhat, no? So you have, and this is the only math in my work. Reproduction plus surplus equals the economy. Then, because man's essence is only realized in his social communal self, and because man's social consciousness is held sway by the fetters of materialism, then pre-analytically, surplus becomes social. Right? Hegelian social theory of mind means material surplus is social. So then what Marx needs to do in order to reunite man with himself is allow a revolutionary agent to bring about a new stateless stage of history, and two, can identify the source of the social surplus. So logical and philosophical necessity creates the exploitation of labor, the change agent, by capital, against which the change agent reacts, with the source of profit, the social surplus value, being the labor definition of value. Social man necessitates a social surplus. Capitalism necessarily makes the surplus private, and only a revolution based on the uniting of private man with the social self can bring freedom to alienated mankind. And then you can oppose that with the pre-Austrian, where the stages of history are analyzed through a two-class lens. The power elite through plunder becomes the dominant class in society through to the capitalist stage, at which point the state becomes the power elite or the unproductive exploiter class. In capitalism, the state maintains its power through the coercive takings of the productive forces of society. A free society whose productive people are able to gain increasing utility through trade is a just society. Much as, I mean, some of the work we've heard earlier today about Hayek and other classical liberals. Only individuals themselves know what brings them value, utility. So therefore, any forces of the state which intervene in this value-creating exchange process represents unjust exploitation. As free association is increased, the power of the exploited class is reduced and human freedom is increased. So there again you have laws of motion of history. And this can be exemplified by Augustin Thierry's work in Le Censor European. We live under powers founded upon conquest, and however decayed they may be, they retain the vestiges of their origin. As they diminish even more, true administration will be born. To hasten this moment, we must reform ourselves. Each citizen, if he wishes to merit the title, must not contribute to power, but shun it. Each must develop a delicacy of conscience, which rejects living off the public, and a healthy common sense which tells him that to hold an office is not always to be useful, but to labor is. And in this sense, he means to labor for the free market and exchange. And this is Monsieur Turgot. In 1750, he had a theory of history. And this is a horrible translation because I did it myself. So the point is, it's just, a lot of people think that Marx wanted his historical materialism to be a universally applicable theory to all history at all places at all times. But that's not what he wanted. And you'll see that Turgot, and also the Austrian school, again, to be somewhat anachronistic, the Austrian school is criticized for being atemporal. But you'll see that the original Austrian thinkers were path-dependent, did have path-dependent theories of history. And here's an interesting letter that Karl Marx wrote to an editor of, is that Polish? Was it Russian? No. So, to a Russian journal, a newspaper in 1877. He feels himself obligated to metamorphosize my historical sketch of the genesis of capitalism in Western Europe into a historico-philosophical theory of the marche générale imposed by fate upon every people, whatever the historic circumstances in which it finds itself, in order that it may ultimately arrive at the form of economy which will ensure, together with the greatest expansion of the productive powers of social labor, the most complete development of man. But I beg his pardon. He is both honoring and shaming me too much. Thus, events strikingly analogous, but taking place in different historic surroundings, lead to totally different results. By studying each of these forms of evolution separately and then comparing them, one can easily find a clue to this phenomenon, but one will never arrive there by the universal passport. So Marx also is path dependent. And you'll see that Turgot has the same, more or less, the same stages of history as did Marx and Smith. You know, the classical stages of history, hunter-gatherer, primitive farming, animal husbandry, the ancients, feudalism, and the commercial stage, Smith's commercial stage, and which is Marx's capitalism. And this is Marx acknowledging his debt to Turgot. Go from feudalism into commercial order. So it's It's well known that the physiocrats had a class system. And that the physiocrats thought that only agriculture products were productive. Therefore, only the agriculture worker is productive labor. And Marx turns Turgot on its head and says that the agriculture worker is exploited by, I just don't find that. The seller sells what he has not bought. Turgot at first presents this unbought element as a pure gift of nature. We shall see, however, that in his writings, this pure gift of nature becomes imperceptibly transformed into the surplus of value. Again, there's a social surplus of the labor which the landowner has not bought, which he sells in the products of agriculture. And then you read, and this is from the critique of the vulgar economics, and then the next sentence he said that it just means that the person who owns the agricultural product sells it for more than the wage he paid the agricultural worker. Not that there's any exploitation involved, just the market process, the entrepreneurial process. Buy low and sell high, that's all that is. And then here's a kind of a lengthy quote from Turgot, which has all of a lot of the Austrian school ideas in it, and it also has Capital in it in 1766. The merchant learns from his correspondence of the plenty or scarcity and of the price of merchandise in those different countries to which his commerce extends. He directs his speculations accordingly. He sends his goods from the country where they bear a low price to those where they are sold dear, including the expense of transportation and the calculation of the advances he ought to be reimbursed. Since trade is necessary and it is impossible to undertake any commerce without advances proportioned to its extent, there's that wacky wage fund idea or whatever. We here see another method of employing personal property, a new use that the possessor of a parcel of commodities reserved and accumulated of the sum of money, in the word capital, may make of it to procure himself subsistence and to augment his riches. So that's how wealth in society is created, through trade, through entrepreneurial activity, through discovery, through mutual trade in the market. And this is let's see how Marx describes wealth being created. So you can look at the different, we talked earlier about the Italian city-states, and both Marx and Turgot had historical writings where they described the formation of the Italian city-states. And this is their differing views based on their differing analytical visions on it. Here's Turgot, an individualist. The shepherds whose livelihood more and more certain were more numerous. They began to be richer and more about the spirit of ownership. Individualism. Marx. Part of its surplus labor, social surplus, belongs to the higher community, which ultimately appears as a person. This surplus labor is rendered as a tribute and as a common labor for the glory of the unity, in part that of the despot, in part that of the imaginal tribal entity of the God, collectivism. And then here's Marx on wealth creation. Capitalists gain a profit partly because they exploit labor in capitalist fashion with different degrees of circumspection and energy, partly because they cheat buyers or sellers of commodities with different degrees of luck and cunning. Not really a good view of human nature in capitalism. So here's the original theory of the class struggle, 1817. Both in feudalism and capitalism. Under feudalism, a kind of subordination that subjected the laboring men to the idle and devouring men, and which gave the latter the means of existing without producing anything or living nobly. there's your social contract, living nobly, saying, okay, it looks like. What must never be lost sight of is that a public functionary in his capacity as functionary produces absolutely nothing, that on the contrary exists only on the products of the industrious classes, and that he consumes nothing that has not been taken from the producers. So the state is the unproductive labor. So the Thierry's 1818 paper, Le Censure Europeenne, is most fully realized systematic exposition of the original libertarian class theory, which contains all of scientific socialism except the violent revolution. And it's a march towards human freedom without revolution, as we spoke earlier. As market increases, power decreases. Thierry writes that the March of Freedom, Napoleon's march, European history was accomplished by the state, and it was only in losing their powers that the actions of the state ameliorated. So this is Marx's letter, 1852 letter about Augustine Thierry. Finally, if I were you, I should tell the democratic gens en general that they would do better to acquaint themselves with bourgeois literature. Again, everyone who doesn't agree with Marx is bourgeois. With bourgeois literature before they venture to yap at its opponents. For instance, they should study the historical works of Thierry, Guizot, John Wade, and so forth in order to enlighten themselves as to the past history of the classes. Now, as for myself, I do not claim to have discovered either the existence of the classes in modern society or the struggle between them. Long before me, bourgeois historians had described the historical developments of the struggle between the classes, as had bourgeois economists. So Marx also claims that he was the first to discover that class analysis can help describe humans' march towards freedom. But in the Le Censure Europeenne, 1818 works, it was already done. Marx, but one of the things we've been debating here is, okay, what is the role of the state? How do the rules evolve? What's the change agent? Is it evolutionary or is it expert? The industrialism theory is you have usurper, power elite, market expands, the power elite decreases, and that's how rules in society are formed. Which pretty much was the case until the until the World War. And so this is Marx's turn on the pre-Austrians. Here, and the theories of surplus value is just these were notes that Engels put together after he died. And he looks at just at Tracy's book. All labor is productive. The laboring class which directly produces our wealth is what Smith calls productive labors. As against these, the sterile class consists of the rich who consume their rent of land, their rent on land, of land or rent on money. These are the idle class. So Marx is imposing his ideas on Gustave Tracy. When Gustave Tracy writes of useful productive labor and of a laboring class, he means a class opposed to those who do not produce for the market and those who live through the taking of productive labor from others by force. He does not mean, nor does he use the term capital class to define his original version of an unproductive exploiter class.
That's you?
That's me. That's me. just reading and interpreting the industrialism materials. The infinite regress there is how did the holder of wealth gain their wealth in the first place? Was it productive or was it through takings? Yeah, that's me. I'm sorry. And this is Thomas Jefferson translated Studs Tracy's book in 1817 and called it a treatise on political economy, and that took away some of the nuances of the whole theory of the class struggle and the historical progression and the march towards freedom, and turned it into a book on political economy. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Society is purely and solely a continual series of exchanges. It is never anything else in any epoch of its duration, from its commencement, the most unformed, to its greatest perfection. And this is the greatest eulogy we can give to it. For exchange is an admirable transaction in which the two contracting parties always both gain. Consequently, society is an uninterrupted succession of advantages, unceasingly renewed for all its members. To the degree that power will lose its actual force and apparent utility, liberty will gain, and free men will draw closer together. Apparent utility, meaning state power is illusionary. Industry will disarm power by the desertion of its satellites. Wonderful writings. Bet it's a lot better in French, too.
Is that Jefferson's?
Oh, yeah, that's Jefferson's translation. Eternal vigilance. So then look at Marx's theory of historical progression as opposed to market exchange, diminishing power. And this is from Capital. Along with the constant decrease in the number of the capitalist magnates who usurp and monopolize all advantages of this process of transformation, the massive misery, oppression, slavery, degradation, exploitation grows. But with this, there also grows a revolt of the working class, a class constantly increasing in numbers and trained, united and organized by the very mechanism of the capitalist process of capitalist production. The monopoly of capital becomes a fetter upon the mode of production which has flourished alongside and under it. The centralization of the means of production and the socialization of labor, the dialectic, reach a point at which they become incompatible and are capitalist entanglement. This entanglement is burst asunder, the knell of capitalist private property sounds, the expropriators are expropriated. Okay. So now to wrap it up. We have seen many similarities between the works of Karl Marx and his self-acknowledged predecessors in the analysis of class struggle, the pre-Austrians, the French radicals, the original utility theorists. The social theories of both use concepts of historical development and path dependency, productive and unproductive labor, of exploitation, the perfectibility of man, consciousness raising, and of the necessary primacy of the market under capitalism to bring freedom. We have also seen the regard that Marx gives to both Turgot and Thierry in his published writings, the former, in both Capital and Theories of Surplus Value, and his personal correspondence. We also know that Marx and Engels have been studying the works of Augustin Thierry for almost a 30-year period. So here's a revisionism. It would only be conjecture to say that Marx's theory of labor exploitation as the economic theory of value, in fact the whole theory of scientific socialism, is derived directly from the radical free market, pre-Austrian, blah, 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 political economists, but we have seen enough similarity between Marx and the Central European writers and their precursor Turgot to propose that their influence was not negligible. So it's not just Hegel that was turned on its head. It was the whole original class struggle theory that Marx was aware of, at least. It is only Marx's Hegel-influenced philosophical predispositions towards reuniting an alienated man with himself that these social theories must abide in substance, one that portends a violent revolution and dictatorship. And here I get into a little empiricism. And this is John Reed and Emma Goldman during the Russian Revolution from the movie Reds.
Dad, I think we have to face it. The dream that we had is done. If Bolshevism means the peasants taking the land, the workers taking the factories, Russia's one place where there's no Bolshevism.
You know, I can argue with counts, I can fight with generals. I can't deal with the bureaucrat.
You think Zenobia, there's nothing worse than a bureaucrat. The Soviets have no more local autonomy. The central state has all the power. All the power is in the hands of a few men, and they are destroying the revolution. They are destroying any hope of real communism in Russia. They're putting people like me in jail. My understanding of revolution is not a continual extermination of political dissenters, and I want no part of it. Every single newspaper's been shut down and taken over by the party. Anyone even vaguely suspected of being a counter-revolutionary can be taken out and shot without a trial. Where does that end? Is any nightmare justifiable in the name of defense against counter-revolution? The dream may be dying in Russia, but I'm not. It may take some time. I'm getting out.
You sound like you're a little confused by the revolution in action, Jepson. Now you've only dealt with it in theory. What did you think this thing was going to be? A revolution by consensus, where we all sat down and agreed over a cup of coffee?
Nothing works. 4 million people died last year. Not from fighting a war. They died from starvation and typhus in a militaristic police state that suppresses freedom and human rights where nothing works.
They died because of the French, British, and American blockade that cut off all food and medical supplies, and because counter-revolutionaries had sabotaged the factories and the railroads and the telephones, and because the people, the poor, ignorant, superstitious, illiterate people, are trying to run things themselves, just as you always said that they should, but they don't know how to run them yet. Did you really think things were going to work right away? Did you really expect social transformation to be anything other than a murderous process? It's a war, E.G. We gotta fight it like we fight a war with discipline, with terror, with firing squads, and we just give it up.
Those 4 million people didn't die fighting a war. They died from a system that cannot work.
Thank you.
Any comments, questions? Yes.
I wanted to ask, what did Marx define freedom as? It seems that he's talking about kind of like a freedom from fear, freedom from oppression, and that freedom of that nature, whereas the French philosophers are probably talking about freedom to choose and freedom to pursue happiness. I wondered if there was any discussion of definitions.
I read Murray Rothbard's History of Economic Thought from an Austrian perspective when I was taking history of economic thought at the New School. And so Rothbard has about 50 pages on Marx. And basically, freedom, it means that under this radical Hegelian philosophy of reuniting man with his alienated self, we are no longer man, basically. We're man gods. So it's a very utopian concept of a man god, where we're free from our biological necessities and our material necessities, our necessities to work, our necessities to socialize, which is the ultimate idea. So that. Yeah, freedom of choice obviously is the original utility theorist's freedom of choice, the ability to contract and gain through exchange is definition of freedom in a libertarian or even perhaps a classical liberal definition.
They let you read Rothbard in the new school? That's very strange. Go ahead.
No, I read it on my own. It's something
It's part of the curriculum.
We're very open-minded there. So it's all.
I took one of your messages in this paper to be that apart from Hegel, Marx also read other people and adopted the writings of other people. Now, Marx being one of those people in intellectual history who must have read almost everybody and everything and studied it in great depth, how surprising is that message?
Is what message?
Your message, as I understand
it's not
just Hegel, it's also Turgot, Cherry.
Well, it's not surprising. I guess my message isn't surprising, but I think the surprising thing is that I just tried to show through historiographical research that he knew of it. All of the ideas. A lot of these ideas are credited to Marx. Historical march for freedom, state productive class struggle. A lot of these things are credited to Karl Marx, which in fact had been done 45 years before by others. And I just tried to prove that he knew about those.
Oh, okay.
You know,
I had missed that last part.
Yeah.
In response, in sort of following up that, the Street Porter volume reproduces Sam Hollander's paper on Marx.
Yes.
And one of the things that Sam was surprised by was the resemblance between Marx's fear of the fragility of socialism with Hayek and von Mises' fear of the fragility of capitalism. And so that you've got this sort of, so Sam saw there's a resemblance in the sort of the modeling results that Marx looks a lot like, in some complicated sense, looks a lot like von Mises and Hayek.
Yeah.
And I thought that, well, you know, there may be that they start from, there may be common starting points.
There are. I can't get this to go back, but when I said that in the common pre-analytical visions that the market was more just than government intervention, that's from Sam Hollander. That's Sam Hollander. That's from that Street Porter. I mean, a lot of people say, was Marx a labor union activist, or was he wanted as much wealth creation so that the revolution could happen? And so I used the Street Porter work in there, and that's where why I say that Marx thought the market was more just than labor union activism. If you read some of Marx's speeches, you know, dumbing down to the labor unions, he said, no, you shouldn't be fighting for, you know, this weird Straussian profit wage trade-off. You shouldn't be fighting for a little more incremental wage. You should be questioning the whole system. So,
and one other point on when you put up the production distribution slide, that seemed to me, that sounds just like Mill. That Marx reproduced Mill's distinction between laws of production and laws of distribution. And if that's right, then all of Marx's grumbling about Mill's vulgarity is covered.
No, he liked John Stewart. He liked Mill. He in fact dedicated one chapter of Capital to Mill. I forget which chapter. It's in the paper. But right, the minute you get like a theory of production, you know, it's immediately interventionalist, right? Because it's not based on property rights; it's based on some kind of leveling. The theory of consumption and production aren't really separatable under a free market because it's all contractual exchange.
your starting presentation reminded me of something I came across a long ago that made me think of it. But said that Marx was really, in his eschatology, was really a Christian heretic, and I think that came across very clearly in your initial part of your presentation of that. But the question is, it goes back that probably not long ago, wrestling with Plato, I've kept this sort of notion of forms and particulars, and thinking whether in terms of a historical matter, whether classes don't always exist and are an inescapable part of social arrangements. But that if you say that, to theorize about the world, we have to have a theory first. What we see is constructed by our theories. And so Marx sort of took Ricardo, and he had land, labor, and capital, which probably was a reasonable kind of historical description back then. But it's certainly not now. We have no agriculture anymore to speak of. And capital is, we all own capital and pension plans and all this sort of thing. But yet, you say the classes, and if the idea of the class, though, not only in Marx, but maybe in general, the classes, if you said that class represents, just like we use language, how people use language, that we can point to sort of recurrent kinds of commonalities in conduct, belief, and action. That, just like we put in the earlier slide, an alternative class depiction was power, state power versus people controlled by it. Right. Another kind of depiction I happen to believe in is a Wall Street versus Main Street kind of class dichotomy, which might partly correspond to other kinds of class. Right. But whether is there a particular sense of Marx, which is that particular class struggle he gave that ran in terms of capitalists appropriating surplus value from labor.
The industrial capital, not the finance capital.
But beyond that, there's also perhaps a Platonic, eternal kind of notion of class in terms of the organization of people's activities, shapes and forms how they understand the world, gives certain kinds of stylized patterns of action, belief, that read different kinds of society. When you look at ancient Aztec societies, China, I always come away with this kind of notion. I've talked to different people in different places that there's differences. I can detect them everywhere, and maybe there's something that's inherent in social processes that's not one homogeneous mass.
So you're saying not just social scientists have the idea of class? I mean, it's like Max Weber, no relation, ideal type, right? So it's just an analytical lens or a method for analysis. But as you know, there is the entrepreneurial view, or the Austrian view, where everyone is unique and individual. We are all capitalists. It's subjective individualism where you can't limit us by a class. And you can look at the Wall Street and Main Street, I'm just pontificating now, but you can look at the Wall Street and Main Street thing as the libertarian class struggle. It's the central bank and the technocrats in the Treasury Department which keep the Wall Street's monopoly rents in the system going. So it is a class struggle, but it's the libertarian class struggle, the original class struggle. And that goes back to your question, which is the other thing I tried to do, which was new here, which would show the origination of why Marx's surplus is a social surplus. It's the Hegelian origin of the alienated other. So it becomes, by definition, a social surplus as opposed to just an agricultural surplus or something.
Yes. My name is Roberto Lampa, Università di Studi di Macerata, Italy. Just a couple of questions, if you want, comments. It's an interesting paper. I have to be sincere. At the beginning, I was a little shocked by, this strange marriage between Marx and Christians. Anyway, I found it interesting and convincing. Just a couple of questions, or if you prefer qualifications, refer to your presentation. You said that value in Marx depends on labor, we can say labor embodied, while Austrian value comes from the exchange. This is truly acceptable to refer to the first book, but then in the second book of Capital, the process of circulation, money, commodity plus money. So maybe it's much more articulated. Also Marx admits the importance of the circulation, the exchange in the process of valuing.
Yeah, very much so. Okay. Can I respond to that?
Sorry?
Yeah, that's what Marxist scholars get into. Is it a theory of value or is it a definition of value? And if you call it a theory of value, then it's easily disproved by its subsequent writings. But if you call it a definition of value, then it's not disprovable. So that's what people default to in general. We buy into it.
All right. Next one, you know, as a person interested in Marx, I will be maybe a little too long, but the synthesis is not one of the most typical features. Anyway, I usually say in 10 pages what normal people could say in one. Anyway, about historical materialism, you associated, to me this is one controversial point, maybe the only one, you associated Marx, historical materialism, to Hegel. Now, I think this statement needs some more qualifications, and again, I make a reference to your presentation, not to your paper, especially in the light of 1946 thesis on Feuerbach and 1947 German ideology, where, of course, there's a harsh criticism against Hegel, and they are the two words where historical materialism comes from. And last, maybe an idea, I don't know if you share it or not, a possible difference between the pre-Austrians, as you call them, and Marx is the underlying idea of equilibrium of each theory. That is, according to the pre-Austrian, as you call them, maybe equilibrium, economic equilibrium is, generally speaking, the rule of functioning of market, right? To Marx, it is, again, second book, reproduction schemes, only a possibility, only a theoretical possibility, but on an effectual plan of functioning of capitalism, this is only a theoretical possibility that never happens, almost never happens. So maybe this is interesting, and that's all.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the pre-Austrians are equilibrium. Marx's equilibrium exchange, but the utility theorists are not. Value is expanded. It's increasing returns to scale, not a linear transformation. But thank you for your philosophical points.
What about Hegel? Most controversial point.
I haven't read all of Karl Marx. I've read some of Hegel, which was, you know, fun. But
I wouldn't say that. Maybe useful, but not
right, Hegel was, you had to throw off your consciousness fetters. Marx was material fetters, so, you know, denied him. So he turned Hegel on his head.
Thank you.
Okay, only one comment I'd like to make. Again about the all liberals, because they were pretty aware of the doctrine of the sans-humanist. I don't know how to explain that in English. Saint-Simon, that was from France, 1829, 1830, and they trace back these... yeah, absolutely. So, and in line with your question, I think there is much more common ground between Marx and those sans-humanists than with the pre-Austrians, French radicals, because they come up with exactly these political with these political objectives of a dependent central bank and fiscal policy, financing the government, financing the economy, and directly controlling of private property. So therefore, I think this might be...
You said government, right? Marx wanted the government to wither away. He didn't want it. The teleological resultant was a government-less society.
I just wanted to make this comment of the of Saint-Simon and this doctrine of 1829, 1830, which might be interesting for your research.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. I would be very much interested in documenting and researching radical political thought throughout time. But this was just a one-off history of thought type project. Yeah.
Are there other comments?
Just a very small question. Why was Jefferson interested in the translation of Turgot? What's the context of this? Maybe.
Wait, just 1 second. So the Saint-Simeons, they wanted government control of production and distribution, right? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, I read this doctrine with respect to central banking, the envisage, and Marx apparently welcomed this. This is exactly the argument what the ordo-liberals make against dependent authorities within the state and so on. So that's
where did Marx acknowledge their work? You know where?
I'm not sure about Marx's.
Because a lot of what people say about Marx and complain about him is that he didn't have any prescriptions. What form should government take? How will distribution be done? How are things communally distributed? Right? But if we're all disembodied man gods, there is no distribution to be made anyway.
Just very small historical question. This Jefferson translation of Turgot. Can you tell a little bit more why Jefferson was?
Thomas Jefferson translated de Tracy. How do you pronounce that? De Tracy. Why he translated him, I'm not sure. That's just something I ran across lately. That I don't even think it's in the paper. It's just something I ran across. I'm not sure what the founders of America were very much interested in Enlightenment thought. So the French radicals, the English radicals. You should go to Philadelphia, and ironically enough, in the Pickles Bank, the second bank in the United States, is a museum dedicated to America's engagement with the Enlightenment. You didn't?
Yeah, but why is interest in the radicals?
Limited government, probably. Theories of limited government.
So, in your presentation, you're juxtaposing Marx with some of the predecessors in the pre-Austrian things. And my rough impression of Marx is he didn't like to see himself as standing on the shoulders of giants. He didn't see himself that way. And I was wondering what actual attitudes he expressed towards some of these people, because I would think that...
Well, I showed you one quote where he liked Turgot a whole bunch, and another quote in a letter that he liked Thierry a whole bunch, right? So he respected them. Jean-Baptiste, if you ever get a chance, it's really fun. Theories of Surplus Value. It's how many pages? 1,500, 2,000 pages, something like that. And it's 3 books, and the last section, book 3, is Marx's critique of vulgar economics, which is basically everyone that disagrees with them. And it's a wonderful read, just the way some of the things he says. But he had nice things to say about Thierry, Turgot, and he stuck to Tracy, he patterned what he wanted out of it. He read into their work what he wanted to see. He saw exploitation of labor, which wasn't there. He saw productive labor, but then due to his due to his Hegelian roots, he turned a surplus into a social surplus, which then turned into exploitation, because he wanted that exploitation to lead to the revolution. So it was a marked, closed system, but it led to, violent revolution. But he did enjoy Turgot's work very much. Very much.
Anything else? Or why don't we go ahead and take a break until 1:45, and then we can come back and have David. All right, thanks very much.